The most important work of your life is the work you do within your soul. This is Home Improvement for the Soul.
Hello, and welcome to Home Improvement for the Soul. I'm Maddie Cheers, and we are back for part 2 of our series with Bob Vetter, where we are talking about the connection between culture and spirituality and healing. And today I really wanted to look at how did you go from the experiences that we talked about in part 1 to be able to then take all of that and work with people as you do now as a healer one-on-one?
Well, I mentioned my adoptive grandfather, Oliver Patapony, and in many ways, the experiences that I had with him became the inspiration for everything that I would do in the realm of healing. And interestingly enough, it's not because he taught me in any systematic way. In fact, it was quite the opposite. He didn't set out to teach me anything. He set out to be kind to me and answer questions. But I found so much inspiration in his life and in the way that he conducted himself that it literally took me decades to unpack the meaning behind everything that he said and everything that he did. So he didn't teach me to be a healer in any way. He served as an inspiration to me.
And I think that's so important. I think that's what these elders can be for us, and that when we are in contact with somebody who is an inspiration, to have that ability to be present with them, and the impact of that relationship gets us to where we become better people. So, continue.
Yeah, so he shared with me what he did over the course of the years that I lived in Oklahoma, and he died shortly after I finished grad school, another, I think 2 years after I finished grad school. So I only saw him one more time before he passed away. But what he taught me indirectly would reverberate throughout my life even till today. I went on to learn from members of other tribes and to be involved in spiritual ceremonies. And those are not things that I generally teach or share with the world, but they went a long way in forming who I am today. A lot of the learnings that I had, a lot of the experiences that I had with the various tribes over the course of a lifetime. It was really much more curanderismo that came to give me the form, the actual techniques that I would use in healing practices. So while I was studying Native North American medicine, when I was in grad school, I was taking a course with Professor Whitecotton, who was well known in the field of ancient, in particular, ancient Mesoamerica. And he was teaching a course on ancient Mesoamerica, and in it, he talked a little bit about his field work. He had done field work in the state of Oaxaca in southern Mexico. And he mentioned curanderismo as a system of healing of medicine that was still in practice today. And that he mentioned that Oaxaca is one of the strongest places for curanderismo, because in a way you could argue that it is in competition with Western modern medicine.
Right.
And in some ways in Mexico it exists because it's a cheaper form of healthcare than conventional medicine.
Yeah.
So I was interested in it academically, and my intention was to do a study of curanderismo. I was going to study it as it's practiced on this side of the border. Since I was in Oklahoma, I figured I could go to South Texas, which is one of the places that it's still practiced. And I could compare the way that it's practiced today. I was going to go down to San Antonio to do it, and then eventually go and do a 1-year study in Oaxaca, Mexico. That was my intention for my PhD program. I ended up doing all of my coursework, but I did not do that part. I ended up taking a terminal master's degree because of things that I didn't particularly like that were going on in the department at the time. So I took a terminal master's degree and I moved back to New York. But in the back of my mind, I had set this intentionality of studying curanderismo in San Antonio, Texas, and then in Oaxaca. Then I went on to do a lot more work in Indian country, in Oklahoma and in other states, other parts of the United States, on reservations and indigenous communities. And I forgot about curanderismo for many, many years. But I found myself in South Texas for another type of native ceremony. And all of a sudden, Maddie, you'll remember, we were in San Antonio, and I said, this is where I was going to do my field work. This is kind of curious. And I decided that I wanted to find out if curanderismo was still being practiced in South Texas in that area. And I found very little. I found that there were herb shops that sold traditional herbs and some of the things that are used in curanderismo, but I really couldn't find anybody who was a practitioner. And the day before we were going to leave, or 2 days before we were going to fly out, I found an obscure article from years prior to that about a woman named Bertha Valdez, who was a practicing curandera who was giving a talk in the local library along with an anthropologist, Elizabeth de la Portilla. And it said in the article that Bertha worked in a Mexican craft shop in downtown San Antonio. So Maddie and I walked into that store, and Bertha was there. She only worked there part-time, but she happened to be there that day. And I asked her if she was the same Bertha, and it turned out yes. Elizabeth de la Portilla actually wrote extensively about Bertha, who she refers to as La Golondrina.
Right.
In her book.
Her name, right?
Yeah.
Her curing name, her
Yeah.
curandera name.
And we spent the entire day in the store with her, just talking to her
I remember.
about curanderismo.
A wonderful woman who's now passed on, sadly.
Yes. And she became my first teacher in curanderismo. Later, I did an apprenticeship with Elena Avila, who wrote the book Woman Who Glows in the Dark. I did a number of apprenticeships with different curanderos and curanderas, male and female, both in the United States and in Mexico. So that was the fulfillment of the first part of what I had set as an intention, was in San Antonio.
And I really think that our experience with Bertha was divine intervention. I mean, we ended up even being there an extra 3 days because there was this huge snowstorm in New York, and Southwest was offering, you could get free extra tickets, and they'd pay for your hotel and everything if you'd stay like 1 day longer or 2 days longer or 3 days longer. And we picked the 3 days because you got the more stuff from that if you stayed 3 days longer. And it all just worked out brilliantly that we got to spend that 3 days with this wonderful, amazing woman.
All day, every day
for 3 days. It was fantastic.
And it seemed as if we had known her our entire lives.
It really did.
So eventually I ended up going to Oaxaca also. And another teacher is Laurencio Lopez Nunez, who is a field biologist as well as being a curandero. And I went my first trip down to Oaxaca was to learn the way of Temazcal. And Temazcal is the ancient Mesoamerican version of what we know as the Sweat Lodge. So I went there originally to learn from him, learned about the Temazcal, learned about other practices of curanderismo, and eventually even leading tours into Oaxaca with Laurencio, which is what I still do today.
Now, when we look at the techniques for healing practices that you talked about, so is there any way for people who are at home to access these techniques or to apply things that you work with, or not? I mean, sometimes I actually, in all honesty out there, folks, I actually think that there are times when you can work on your own. There are things you can do on your own, but I very often think that a lot of it requires somebody who is studied and works in the field that you're interested in. And I know this is for me, you have to find your person. You know, it's kind of a journey of the heart to find the person that's going to be best for you. So any recommendations along that line?
I won't be able to answer that until I complete one section of this, which is to
Okay.
explain the building blocks of the work that I do.
Oh, good. Okay.
So in learning curanderismo, I was exposed to a number of three main building blocks, three main healing practices that I think have been important for me. Number one is plática. Plática is the Spanish word for what we would call a heart-to-heart talk. And it's sometimes described as the correlate of psychotherapy, but there are some very, very important differences between plática and psychotherapy. It is not of the mind, it is of the spirit. So it is sinking from the mind, or from a very cerebral way of thinking and communicating, sinking into the heart, the place where the emotions meet the spirit.
And this is so important now because a lot of the elders we work with, even people, I just went to a program with Greg Braden, very well known through Humanities Team and his own work and his lots of books and everything. And this is precisely what he was talking about, is we really need to flip the way that we are approaching the world. We need to come from the heart first and then into the mind, or at the very least, we need to bring them into balance, because right now we are far too stuck in the mind. But please continue.
So yeah, I mean, the what I consider to be the core of what I learned in Plática, I learned from Elena Avila, who I believe was an absolute master at it, because she was not only a curandera, but she was also a psychiatric nurse. That had been her training prior to moving into the field of curanderismo. So she taught Plática as a discipline that you could learn, and actual techniques of how to communicate with a person, how to get below what it is that a person brings to the table. So there is the presenting problem, which is almost never the root issue. But through learning these techniques of Plática, I believe that I became able to do that, to go from what a person thinks they're coming to me for to what underlies it and what needs to be changed in order for that other thing to be resolved.
Right.
So the first step is Plática. And in curanderismo, you could be any type of practitioner. You could be a massage therapist. You could be a bone setter. You could be an herbalist. You could be a midwife. Any one of the branches of curanderismo, they all depend on Plática. That's why in teaching it, which I do to my students, I teach Plática and put so much emphasis on that. The second technique that was very important to me is limpia, the spiritual cleansing. And there's a relationship between the two. In Plática, we uncover what it is that needs to be changed. We identify the emotions that are connected with whatever the problem is. We identify what the positive state is that we want, what we want to get rid of, what we want to move into. And that is then symbolically represented within this cleansing ceremony. So there is a form to it. There are, for example, most commonly two things. One is the barrida, or sweeping away of problematic energy. And second is the egg, the use of the egg. And in both cases, it's symbolic healing and it's energetic healing, because we look at what the emotions are that are problematic when we use a bundle of herbs in what we call a barrida or a sweeping. Imagine that the negative energy is like a dust that has settled on you.
Right.
And imagine that the bundle of herbs is like a little broom that you're using to sweep it away to get at the cleanliness that's under it. I mean, that's what we do when we dust our house.
Exactly.
Right? You take
or
a duster.
when we hire someone else to dust our house.
But the point is that the dust settles on.
Right.
And we have to do something to get rid of it. So the barrida is one way of doing that. It's more of, I describe it as the surface level of the stuff that you want to get rid of. Schmutz, if you like to call it that.
Got to get rid of the schmutz.
Energetic schmutz.
Energetic schmutz, yes.
That would be the Jewish kurenderismo. The second way is with the egg, which is a deeper energetic cleanse. And the egg is a single cell. It's a perfect organism to use for it. And it's like an energetic sponge. So we pass the egg over the person and rub the egg on the person in order to both symbolically and or literally take the energy that originated in an emotional problem, an emotional blockage. It is symbolically absorbed into the egg, and one might argue literally absorbed into the egg.
I would argue that in certainly in the limpias I had with Bertha, certainly ones that I've done with Laurencio, there's been changes in that egg that are just remarkable and almost different every time.
And so the egg then, we're taking the energy that is problematic, that is inside of you, not on the surface, but inside of you. We're transferring it to the egg, and then we get rid of the egg in a very highly ritualized way as well.
Right.
We also can read the egg at times if we choose to, but that's the second technique. The third technique is something called soul retrieval, and it's based on a notion that is found, interestingly enough, in non-Western cultures all over the world, that we have experiences that in curanderismo are referred to as susto. Susto has been described by anthropologists as magical fright, but I prefer to think of it as a soul loss that accompanies a type of spiritual fright. So rather than describing it as a psychological condition, we think of it as a spiritual condition. And just to describe it quickly, we believe that your soul is intact. It is a whole, an entirety, a unity when you're born into the world. But the first experience that we have that may or may not be trauma, but the first problematic experience that is overwhelming in one way or another causes a splinter of the soul to be left behind at the time and the place that the event occurred.
Right.
And that is to protect the wider organism. It allows you to compartmentalize. I know something awful just happened here. I can't deal with it right now, but I have to go on living. So the piece of the soul stays there to protect the rest of you.
Right.
And that's a great strategy for short term, but not such a great strategy for long term.
Exactly.
And so the soul retrieval is the attempt to coax back the part of the soul that left, the protector.
And I think that, when we look at all the discussion around trauma that's going on today, and like you said, it may or may not be trauma, but I must see this pop up every single day, every day. I'm not making this up. I mean, there's something on trauma. Somebody's giving a course on trauma. Somebody's talking about the trauma of this, the trauma of that. And yet within that, we're only in our culture, we only approach it from like a psychological, a psychotherapy point of view. Whereas these other cultures have these brilliant and beautiful ways of dealing with the spiritual and the heartfelt solutions for this particular problem.
Exactly. So those three techniques really became the core of my work. And then, as you know, I also studied hypnosis, specifically Ericksonian hypnosis,
Right.
and how that can be helpful in doing this work. Neurolinguistic programming, another modern technique that is very helpful and that can be blended in with this, and even something called havening, which is a technique to be able to physiologically calm the body, mind, and spirit down, that's combined with therapeutic techniques.
And what's so interesting about all of this, and why you and I are both so committed passionately to getting this word out there, is the success of dealing with human beings. The success rate in this way is astronomically more successful. It's just astronomically higher than when you're shoving drugs down people.
True.
And as a matter of fact, when you're shoving drugs down people, you're risking all kinds of other complications, physical health complications, not to mention, sometimes you'll listen to a commercial about antidepressants and it will tell you one of the side effects is suicide. How is that helping? If you're already depressed and you're trying to prevent suicide, you're going to put a drug into somebody that may lead them to commit suicide.
Well, we want an instant answer.
Exactly. And I think that's why it's so important. You said earlier, in the way you learned to do this, it was slow. And in the approach we need to have now, we have to slow it down with the intrusion of AI, which I refuse to call, as you know, intelligence of any sort. Artificial intelligence is not intelligence. The only things that are intelligent are us, are people and plants and animals have a certain type of intelligence. Machines do not have any other intelligence than what we put into them. But the line that especially young people are being fed is that, oh, these machines are going to cure everything. The less human we are, the better off we are. And this to me is just so astounding. And when you look at the process of curanderismo, this is where we need to be headed, so that our human and divine evolution can continue, in my personal opinion.
So, if I can kind of bring this toward a close.
Okay.
During COVID, as you know, we put in some raised beds, and I had planted some vegetables and some herbs.
Right.
And one day, in the middle of the summer, I guess it was the first year of COVID, I was watering and I was trying to think, as I was doing it, of a variety of ways to convey what I thought was the problem and the way that we solve it within curanderismo, because there was something that I was going to be teaching my students. And I was walking along with the hose and I was watering everything and just happily watering and kind of thinking while I was doing it. And all of a sudden, there was no water coming out of the hose. And I looked ahead of me and I turned around and I looked behind me and I realized that as I had walked to the edge of the bed, that there was a kink was created in the hose and the water was stuck, and that's why it wasn't coming out. And I realized that that was the perfect metaphor to understand what happens energetically and emotionally that we work with in curanderismo. Because there is the belief within this system that there is no such thing as a bad emotion by itself.
Right.
What is problematic is when a particular emotion connected with a thought pattern becomes stuck. And it's like a broken record that just goes over and over, and it repeats and it repeats. And it creates this blockage of thinking properly, this blockage of energy, this blockage of emotion. And that is what we attempt to release. Now, Another analogy that I like to make, or metaphor, is that I describe the work as being creating order in a bowl of spaghetti. And what I mean by that is, if you look at a lot of what healing work is, it is to create order amidst chaos, because our greatest suffering is when we feel that we're in the middle of chaos.
Right.
When we feel that we have no agency in the world, something is happening to us, and I can't do a thing about it.
Absolutely. That's what most people are feeling right now.
And so the solution is not to pick up the bowl of spaghetti and try to organize the entire bowl. The solution is to take one piece of spaghetti, one piece of pasta, take it out of the bowl, examine it, straighten it out, and create order in that one piece.
Right.
And what's amazing is that will often go far in straightening out the rest of it.
Oh.
Now, to answer your question that started all of this, which is what can somebody do who is listening? And I always think it's actually better to go to a practitioner, to be perfectly honest with you.
So do I.
But if you want to do this on your own, here's the thing to do. Reflect back on the last week of your life and think about what one emotion was problematic. What was it that came up in a number of ways? And be able to articulate that, say it out loud to yourself, or maybe even write about it. How the emotion played into the story, because another thing that I work with, as you know, is narrative medicine. It's the use of story as a way of healing. So in the story that I tell about what happened to me over the course of the last week, what is the one or two emotions that were present in that story that were problematic? And then if I want to just try out the barrida part of it, you could take a bundle of herbs like rosemary, like mint, even chamomile, herbs that you can get your hands on. That you take a bundle of the herbs and you talk out loud and you sweep as you talk about the story and as you talk about the problematic emotion that you want to be rid of and what you want to replace it with. That's something that somebody listening could actually try out at home.
Yes, and this is one of the things that Greg Braden was talking about, is this idea that we have to have more ritual. We've lost ritual. We've lost rites of passage. That's why we both feel it's more important to find somebody to work with than to try to do this on your own, because, there's a loneliness epidemic in our country. We were just listening to this morning on the television on this show about other cultures and why people live to be 100 and why they don't. So it's just very, very important to understand that there is a slowing down process that needs to take place, and that a lot of our answers are not going to be found in drugs. They're not going to be found anywhere in our culture. We're going to have to make friends and find them in other cultures. So I would like you, please, Bob, to give us your contact information and mention your book, please, that you did with our Uncle Richie.
Sure. So I wrote a book, or I co-wrote a book, with my adopted Kiowa uncle, Richard Tarza Sr., called Big Bo, The Spiritual Life and Teachings of a Kiowa Family. And that book is available on Amazon. So anybody who would like more information about the work that I do, including my podcast, Healing and Spirituality in World Cultures, please go to my website, which is www.bobvetter.com. So BOBVETTER. www.bobvetter.com. There's lots of freebies on there that I think you'll enjoy.
Oh, thank you so much. And we will be back with Bob next week. But right now, I am actually going to do another one of the divine downloads. And this happens to be one of Bob's favorite downloads. So what I wanted to do too is my book is coming out. It should be up on Amazon too. Amazon soon. It is called The Mandala Meditations. So when you listen to this poetry, Bob pointed out to me, a couple of people pointed out to me, might want to take a big deep breath and a big exhale and just relax, close your eyes, just listen to the poetry. Slow your own self down. Feel good while you're listening. And this one comes from a time when we were with a large group of people with our friend and another teacher, Oscar Miro Casada, and they were making a despacho, which is an offering that's made out of flowers and all kinds of things for nature that you either burn in the fire or you send it down a river, but it's an offering for everybody when we're giving thanks or when we're asking for something specific. While they were making the despacho, this poem came to me. Offer your heart and offer your soul. Offer the love that keeps us all whole. Offer the good and offer the bad. Offer the happy and offer the sad. Offer what's precious and gifted and rare. Offer what cannot be offered or spared. Give till you have nothing more left to give. Give so that others can find how to live. Give to the west and give to the east. Give to the babies, the birds, and the beasts. Give until all that is left is your love, and all of this light can connect from above. And as you are giving, keep one thing in mind, that all of this giving is one way to find the truth of our hearts, the truth of our souls, the song in the light that keeps us all whole. There never is nothing that you cannot give, for love and compassion is what lets you live. So if giving is not something you've ever known, then start down its path, and you will be shown the way to the light, the way of above. The way is the star road, and all built of love. I wish you all a beautiful, happy, wonderful week with fun and joy and love. Thanks for listening. And we'll be back next week with Bob Vetter one more time. Thank you, everybody. Have a great one.
Thank you for joining us for Home Improvement for the Soul. If you'd like more information, please go to womensoneness.com or maddiecheers.com. That's womensoneness.com or maddiecheers.com. See you on the next episode.